This is marvelous. What was the composer?
This is Messiaen, Olivier Messiaen.
Olivier Messiaen.
Yes.
Which part of the?
This is the Prélude. Préludes. Very early piece, written écrit quand il était étudiant à la Conservatoire à Paris, édité en 1929. It's very early work.
Very early work. This is the first time I listened to this from Messiaen. This is very harmonic and very.
It's wonderful, very rich in harmony. Yeah, it's very rich and. So there's a concert tomorrow night at 8 o'clock entirely of the music of Messiaen.
Who are you, Mr.?
I'm Peter Hill is my name, and I'm here for a few days from England.
From England?
Yeah.
Oh, this is marvelous. I will put it in Facebook. I came for the office and I said, what a postlude of this office.
Well, you should come to the concert tomorrow. I mean, because we're doing fantastic things. There's a violinist who I met this afternoon, and we're playing a piece called Thème et Variation, Messiaen of 1932, which he composed as a wedding present for his wife, who was a violinist. They married in 1932.
Okay.
And we're also playing, to end the concert, I and the violinist will play the final movement of the Quatuor pour la fin du temps.
Oh, oui.
Which is called Louange à l'immortalité de Jésus.
Donc le dernier mouvement du Quatuor pour la fin des temps.
The last movement, dernier mouvement de la Quatuor pour la fin du temps.
This is marvelous. This piece was almost impressionist.
Yes, it is. Yes, well,
we think about Debussy when we hear about that.
He's a French composer.
Yes, of course.
And they're called preludes, so that's a famous example. But actually, the remarkable thing, this is a young man of 20, and it sounds really like no other composer than Messiaen. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, it's immediately identifiable as his voice, even though he's only 20. It's extraordinary achievement. There are very few composers in the entire history of music that you could say that. I think Mendelssohn is the obvious example of a composer who found his voice when he was a teenager. But Messiaen did also.
Yeah, he was a genius at this age, and but we can predict by what we have listened together what he will become as a composer, because he changes language completely.
Yes, well, then the other pieces I do are much. These are
La Chouette Hulotte.
The Tawny Owl, yes, La Chouette Hulotte. This is from the Catalogue d'Oiseaux,
Oui.
which is a huge cycle.
Yes.
Piano pieces, and this is much more dissonant, much more abrasive, and more modern, you would say. But this is 25, 30 years later.
Can you give our Facebookers an example for that?
Yes.
Okay.
This is evocation of darkness for the owl, for La Chouette Hulotte, and the darkness is frightening. So this is the darkness in which the predator hunts the prey. So it's frightening. And then you get the owls. So that's the call of the tawny owl. Then the other piece I'm going to play is called the woodlark, or L'alouette loulou in French.
Yes.
And then here there's the same. It's an evocation of darkness, but this time it's peaceful. So you get always a cadence. And then the woodlark. So it's much more peaceful, and then he compares this. You have to imagine somewhere in the darkness above us there is this flock, and they're in pairs, 2 by 2. They're unpeeling from the flock, and he says it's like unthreading jewels from a necklace, you know. It's very, very beautiful image.
And these notes are almost phosphorescent compared to the darkness here in the back. This is marvelous piece.
Yes, it's wonderful stuff.
Donc, catalogue d'oiseaux, vous en jouez 2 du catalogue d'oiseaux.
Du catalogue d'oiseaux, oui. La chouette Lotte et l'alouette Loulou, and 2 préludes.
Pourriez-vous me faire la faveur encore pour nos Facebookers de reprendre le prélude ou le deuxième? Vous avez joué un extrait du premier tout à l'heure, hein?
There's a short prelude to begin with. Do you want me to play the whole thing?
Please.
Yeah. It takes about a minute and a half, I suppose. This one. This is called La Colombe.
Okay.
So it's another.
La Colombe. Okay.
La Colombe, yeah.
C'est extraordinaire. C'est extraordinaire. C'est toute la luminescence de l'œuvre, même de l'œuvre pour orgue de Messiaen, qu'on ressent à travers ce prélude-là. C'est incroyable. Mais on n'aurait jamais pu, même si c'est génial, et même si ça va un peu dans le domaine de Ravel, de Debussy, ce qu'on connaît, on n'aurait jamais pu prévoir qu'il aurait évolué dans son langage autant qu'à la fin de sa vie. Comment se fait-il pour vous, qui êtes un anglophone, qui êtes un bon anglais de naissance, comment vous faites pour habiter si habilement l'univers de Messiaen, vous qui n'êtes pas français?
Well, can I say in English?
Yeah, of course.
It's a long story, but in about 1985, I was approached completely out of the blue by a record company in London who had made a recording of the complete organ music of Messiaen, of which there is a great deal, and they wanted to follow this up with a piano cycle. There's even more piano music than organ music, and they asked me to do it. I was astonished. It was... You know, I wasn't a Messiaen specialist or anything like that, but of course I said yes. And I worked, it took about 7 years to make all the recordings. And during that time I was introduced to Messiaen after a concert in London. And he said, as you're recording my piano music, you must come to Paris and let me hear you play.
Of course.
He wanted to check me out, and so I went to Paris, and it was a very, very frightening experience in a way to go and play with the great composer, but it was a great, great privilege. I learned a tremendous amount, and I greatly admired Messiaen personally because he was so generous to me, and he was very supportive, very encouraging, and I finished my recording, But so I used to go to see him every year for about the last 4 years of his life, and have lunch with him and so on. And he was so generous because mostly when you go and you play to a great person, they say, well, I can give you till 6 o'clock or something like that. It wasn't like that at all with Messiaen. I remember my first occasion that I went to him, we began at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We finished working at midnight. And this was a man in his late 70s, not in very good health. And he was just so generous, and he was, completely focused on we finish when we're finished, and it was always like that, you were completely his. You worked together with him, and it was really a fantastic experience. It was so generous, really marvelous. So I learned a lot. So now I'm a kind of Messianist, yes, of course. As a result of this, I do lots of other things as well. I'm recording Bach at the moment, but the Well-Tempered Clavier. But I always come back. I love Messiaen because, of course, I knew Messiaen, and I made the recording and so on. And people asked me to come, and they always asking me to play Messiaen. So I'm actually here in Montreal for a few days. I'm doing a concert on Saturday with a wonderful pianist called Louise Bessette, and we're doing Stravinsky's arrangement of The Rite of Spring for piano. One piano, and in the second half we're doing the Messiaen two-piano piece called Vision de l'Amen, so it's great to do that. I'm giving a lecture tomorrow at McGill about the work I've been doing on Messiaen's sketchbooks, and particularly his books for notating birdsong, and there's a huge collection. There are 200 volumes of his birdsong cahier, his notebook, Cahier de notation de chant d'oiseaux, kept in Paris, and there's about 10,000 pages, and they've never been studied seriously, and there's no kind of catalogue or a list of contents or anything, which I'm trying to do. And it's a great privilege because they were notebooks for Messiaen only, for his private development of his ideas, not only in birdsong, but lots of other compositional sketches and so on, and you see his development. So it's very, very interesting. So I've been doing that work, so I'm giving a lecture about that at McGill tomorrow afternoon.
It will be very interesting, and you went everywhere around the world to know these bird songs, eh?
Well, he did when he became older and he became famous, and from the 1960s onwards, his first big trip was to Japan in 1962, but he went to Japan, he went to the Holy Land, he came over many times to the United States anyway. I'm not aware that he ever went to Canada, but anyway, he was often in the United States, and he went often to Japan, and then there was a great trip that he made to Australia 4 years before he died. He went in 1988 to Australia, and that inspired his last great orchestral piece, actually, which is called Éclairs sur l'au-delà. So he did go all over the world, but he also used recordings of bird songs because his students used to give him, records of bird songs from whichever country they came from. So he had students from New Zealand he never went to New Zealand himself, but he knew all the New Zealand birds, and he started to use them in his later compositions. But of course he always came back to the birds of France, which he studied always, in nature. So these notebooks are very, very interesting, very important. Very beautiful.
Et il a utilisé beaucoup, je me souviens dans les méditations sur le mystère de la Sainte Trinité, à un moment donné, une citation du bruit en jaune sur des ruines de Terre Sainte, justement. Et il le note, il dit, c'est le bruit en jaune que j'ai pris dans les ruines en Terre Sainte et, à l'aube. Et à ce moment-là, il fait des associations avec les chants d'oiseaux, les couleurs de vitraux, la théologie.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, he had this it's called synesthesia, whereby you hear colours, as well as see them. You associate sound colours with visual colours, and this was very important to him. And people often think it's a kind of secret language, but actually one can begin to make the associations that Messiaen made if you know what the music is about. Very often it's very descriptive of somewhere in nature or a landscape or the plumage of a bird or something like that, and you begin to understand the sort of harmonies that Messiaen uses to create certain colours. But he was a wonderful colourist, very much, of course, in the French tradition, the composers you mentioned, like Ravel and Debussy and so on, who this wonderful sensitivity to colour that he actually had. But it's very much his own harmony, his own language that he created. He was a truly very original person.
Ici, à Montréal, vous allez travailler sur une écriture qui est celle de Stravinsky, qui est très dynamic, vigorous dans the Rite of Spring reduction. But what kind of association can you do with the contrapuntic work you are doing with the Bach? Okay,
I see.
And Messiaen's writing.
Well, the association with Messiaen is not terribly strong. Messiaen, of course, was an organist, and he was the parish organist of a church called La Trinité in the middle of Paris.
Yes.
And he was organist there for 60 years, and he, of course, was one of the great improvisers of his day, and hundreds of people used to come after Mass on Sunday morning.
A little bit like Bach was.
And very, very much like Bach, or like Buxtehude before him.
Yes.
And Messiaen certainly used to play. There isn't a very strong connection, perhaps. They're very, very different in style, I suppose. But somehow there is a connection in the kind of the sense of the humanity, I think, behind the notes. That of course, I knew Messiaen personally, and one of the things I found very attractive about Messiaen was that he was a very, very intelligent person, of course, but he was essentially very simple. And at heart, in the center of his being, was somebody
humble man.
Humble, yeah, but simple in a kind of naive way. Very open to experience, not kind of sophisticated or cynical, if you know what I mean. And I think one very strongly gets the same feeling about Bach as well. This was somebody tremendously open to other people's music. Bach kind of looked outwards and seemed in some amazing way to be aware of the distant history of music that finds its way, the music of the Renaissance that finds its way into Bach's music. And of course Bach seems to travel forwards into time because he's so influential on Beethoven or Brahms or Schoenberg or Stravinsky.
Even Schoenberg and Stravinsky, of course.
So you find these pre-echoes of later composers, but you feel that Bach was somebody who was so creative because he was in a way kind of playful, that he actually enjoyed the business of using musical materials. He was incredibly inventive. So although I think, Messiaen and Bach are very, very, very different in style, in some ways I feel there's a sort of human connection between them, and as I say, they were both very, very religious. They worked for the church. They were both great organists. They were both great improvisers, so that they have that in common.
And they knew, both of them knew deeply the theology of their own religion. Messiaen as a Catholic, and Bach as a Lutheran.
You're absolutely correct. Yes.
So two men of faith and profound faith.
Oh, yes.
Do you feel the importance of the faith in the music of Messiaen, or do you think that this is pretty far away from it?
No, I think it's tremendously important, and I think what you can say about Messiaen is that of the great artists of the 20th century, he is one of the very few, I don't say he's unique, but he's one of the very few that one would say was an optimist. His music ultimately radiates this joy, this complete conviction, which, perhaps we would all like to share, but we can't necessarily share. But he had this complete faith. So it's very interesting, the two works that I'm playing with Louise on Saturday night, to contrast the Vision de l'Armène of Messiaen with the Sacre du Printemps of Stravinsky. The Stravinsky is essentially a very pessimistic work. It's incredibly exhilarating, but of course it's seeing humanity as just, governed by instinct, I mean, the way the spring is
and
celebrated.
The pagan instinct.
And the pagan instinct as well, and the humanity in the grip of forces completely beyond their control. So there's no kind of free will. Do you know what I mean? You're held in the grip of the forces of nature, and you give thanks, obviously, for the arrival of spring. The more clement season, but you know what I mean. The idea of sacrificing somebody to propitiate the god of spring seems very, very shocking in a way. And
yes,
the work is incredibly violent. I mean, Stravinsky always remembered the violence of the Russian spring of his childhood. He said it was like the whole earth cracking. That was the great event of every year of my childhood. Because in Russia there's a real winter, like there's a real winter in Canada.
Of course.
You wouldn't get that feeling in the United Kingdom. But anyway, but there's this essentially almost frightening quality in the Rite of Spring. It's almost as if, I mean, Stravinsky himself said, I was the vessel through which the Rite of Spring passed. It was almost as if it was a work that he discovered rather than that he invented. You know what I mean? And it has that frightening impersonal quality, like the great works of nature, like standing in front of the Himalayas or something like that, or a great turbulent ocean or something like that. It's like that. Whereas the Messiaen, you feel, yes, there are big and awesome things, but ultimately there's this incredible faith and joy. So there are very, very big contrasts. Messiaen, of course, great admirer of the Rite of Spring, and it was the center of his teaching in musical analysis at the Conservatoire, his famous class at the Conservatoire. But he likened it to the speech from Shakespeare's Macbeth, la vie n'est qu'une ombre qui passe, un pauvre acteur qui se pavane et s'agite durant son heure sur la scène et qu'on n'entend plus, etc. Lies but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is seen no more. A tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It's a complete nihilistic view of human existence without hope. We're here and then we're just, then we're gone. That's it. But then Messiaen is different. There's hope.
I want to know, from the point of view of you guys in England, the gentlemen in England, through the eyes of Vaughan Williams or Elgar, what are the remaining of the fate of Bach, or the way the French are seeing music? Do you find something which is from the same kind of inspiration in these good composers?
Oh, well, no, very, very, very much so. I mean, Vaughan Williams would be a case in point. Funnily enough, I believe that he was not actually, I think he was not a believer himself.
Yes.
But you get this tremendous sort of rootedness, I think, of Vaughan Williams. And I think with him you get, I mean, the wonderful tradition of English sacred music goes back to the time of the Reformation in the 16th century. Well, before Purcell, indeed, going back to Byrd and Tallis and people like that.
Thomas Tallis.
Because, you had this situation where after the Reformation, then all the services were going to be in English, and suddenly there was this need to compose all this music with new settings, you know, and obviously the prayer book was of the Anglican prayer book and so on. And so you've got this incredible flowering of church music in England in the 16th century. And it goes on in the 17th century, people like Orlando Gibbons and Purcell that you mention. And it's a wonderful heritage, and I'm glad to say that it still lives on in English churches, and particularly cathedrals, where there are great choirs, and they sing this incredible repertoire. And for me, one of the disappointments of going to France, you go to a great cathedral like Chartres, and you find, of course, it's all the new Catholic liturgy, and you know it's all very democratic, and the congregation joins in. But what they're not doing is singing the great heritage, you know, the Josquin, the Dufay, whatever it is.
Right, Dufay, Després.
And that's not part of the repertoire, but of course it should be. And I'm glad to say that in England our heritage is very much there. You go to an English cathedral to hear evensong, you'll hear this fantastic music, you know. So it's wonderful, really.
C'est vraiment merveilleux. Pour terminer l'entrevue, j'aimerais vous demander si je vous obligeais, là, je vous oblige, okay, you're alone on a desert island, you have one piano and the capacity to play only one piece of music. Which one would you like to still be able to play?
I would say something like possibly the Diabelli variations of Beethoven.
Oh yeah, les variations Diabelli de Beethoven. You amaze me. Why?
Because this is completely universal. It's a late piece by Beethoven, but it has an extraordinary youthfulness to it. It's at a consistently exalted, really fresh level of inspiration throughout, and it travels through time. It goes back to review the composers that influenced Beethoven, Bach, Handel, and so on. And I think it's a really extraordinary piece. That would be one of my pieces, but I equally might go for an earlier, equally great set of variations, like Goldberg variations of Bach. If by one piece one means one volume of music, it might be one of the volumes of the Well-Tempered Clavier, which of course would give you a whole universe. That's a bit of a cheat, I suppose, but you know. But if it were one piece of music, I think it might be either the Goldbergs or the Diabelli.
Oh oui. Ah oui. Les variations Goldberg, encore plus que les variations Diabelli de Beethoven.
Yes, they're equally amazing and extraordinary. So I would find it very difficult to choose between them. But they're curiously similar because they're both late works. I mean, Goldberg's was from the 1740s, so it's in Bach's. He died in 1750, so it's quite late work, but it has this amazing kind of youthfulness in some ways, if you know what I mean. You know, you don't. It is this wonderful kind of poetry and wit and grace and vitality is absolutely fantastic. It's very, very like the Beethoven in that respect, but the Beethoven is truly extraordinary as well. So, but I don't know. I've never even thought of that question. Usually, one is allowed to choose a dozen works or 8 works or whatever it is. To choose one would be very cruel.
And you touch Canada, you know, because of Glenn Gould, les variations Goldberg, c'était sa pièce. Il a commencé sa vie avec ça et il a terminé.
He finished it too. Yeah, the 2 recordings at either end of his career. Yes. Yeah, particularly for me, the second recording is very, very marvelous because I think he found a kind of poetry which he didn't have so much when he was younger. But
he was more mechanical.
Yes, well, yeah. Of course, he's a phenomenon, really. My own approach to Bach is completely different, but then I think it has to be. You know, you can't play Bach. Let's get Glenn Gould plays it. It would be very unwise to try because he was very, very extraordinary, kind of unique kind of person. And I think everybody has to find their own way with Bach, you know. And the marvelous thing about Bach is that it can take this huge variety of approach because there's so much. You will never finish finding new discoveries in Bach.
Mais le point de vue de Glenn Gould était quand même un point de vue qui serait difficile à défendre aujourd'hui là, sur Bach. Ça a été éblouissant de l'entendre. Nous, les mélomanes, on était bien contents, mais il y a quand même une autre façon de commenter et de jouer et d'interpréter Bach que celle de Glenn Gould. Et ce que je comprends bien, c'est que c'est effectivement pas cette façon-là avec laquelle vous abordez l'œuvre de Bach. Vous abordez l'œuvre de Bach peut-être d'une façon plus traditionnelle que Glenn Gould?
No, I mean, I don't think of it like that. I think if you're going to play Bach on the piano, you have to think very carefully in a way what your approach is, because obviously you're playing on an instrument very different from any of the instruments.
Oui, le clavecin était...
Very, very different from the ones that Bach knew, but on the other hand, what one is trying to do is, as it were, to bring forward your perceptions of how the music works, what the music is saying, and so on. And for me, I think it's the possibilities of color in the piano for underlining the marvelous harmonic movements in Bach, but also I think for distributing the layers of counterpoint, the voices of counterpoint in such a way that they're heard, so that if you're playing a fugue in 4 voices, it actually sounds like 4 different instruments playing, or 4 different people playing, not just one person playing a piano, you know. And I think that's a great art, so one works to do that. And I don't think you think about, you know, the style of Glenn Gould or whatever it is. You're reacting to the music. And for me, every piece of Bach demands a new style. You know, there is no Bach style, because that would be to diminish the music. Each one requires a new style, and I think we must stop, because I think the church is closing.
Of course. I'm abusing of the time, and you. Thank you very much. Why don't you stay?